I've already had a few cookies. This guy will be home with the family. I'll be in Pittsburgh on Sunday. He's on the backfields until we get there in Owings Mills. He is our Ravens insider for WNST.net and Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. We welcome Luke Jones on. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, man. It's certainly, I'm feeling a holiday vibe with Pittsburgh and Baltimore out in Owings Mills this week, right?
You as well. And it's definitely an interesting vibe. I mean, certainly you have a Ravens team that, beginning of the season, coming off a 5-11 record, there's nothing more you could have asked for than to be playing the Pittsburgh Steelers for a chance to win the AFC North. We know it's not a winner-take-all. The Ravens have to win next week as well if they want to be AFC North champions. But, all things considered, even with the flaws of this football team that you and I have discussed at length week after week, this team's 8-6, and they have a chance to win the division and have a home playoff game. And I think most people would have signed up for that prior to the season, knowing what they were coming off of a year ago.
Well, did you think this game would mean nothing? I mean, were we going to have a 4-game lead and just be coasting? This game was certainly going to mean something for at least one of these teams. And, same thing with Cincinnati next week. If they would have played themselves into this, the league has done a nice job of making these games matter, and they matter when we're all sitting around with our families. And, I can't begin to tell you how many households are going to be disrupted this weekend by football, right? Cincinnati, Houston are playing Christmas Eve. It's insane, but the league can kind of get away with it, I should say, because I think people are just going to stop and watch this thing. I mean, I know your family usually has a normal Christmas at 5 o'clock on Christmas Day. Yeah, the Ravens are going to be involved this year for you and everybody else, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's, there's a whole different discussion there. And I mean, the NBA has played on Christmas Day for years. I mean, the NFL has played on Christmas Day before. The Ravens played on Christmas Day in 2005 against the Minnesota Vikings, one of Kyle Bowler's select few great
Not
games.
My favorite Christmas.
yeah, but that
this
issue
one sets
aside,
up to be a good one, though, right? I mean, you win, it's a good Christmas. So you'll remember it if they win in some dramatic fashion, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, if you're going to play on Christmas, you'd rather it be meaningful. And one, it'll be meaningful because they're still relevant, they're still in the division race. And two, if you're a Ravens fan, you hope they win because it will make Christmas that much better. It will make that disruption of family activities that much better or justified, I suppose. So, I mean, it's you have all of the high stakes, but then the thought that this is a Christmas Day game, really a Christmas night game. It's going to be nighttime for most of that game at Heinz Field. So, I mean, it's it's going to be exciting from that standpoint. Ravens haven't been on primetime a ton this year, so this is pretty much a primetime game.
It's like the Cowboys. Every game's primetime, right? The only 1 o'clock game they played all year was against us. I think we went in there, literally go through their schedule. All right, man. So I've been in Pittsburgh all week and talking to lots of people that spend time there and are embedded. I think the general vibe is they're playing their best football, right? Right. If you go back 6 weeks ago, the Dallas game when we beat them, Roethlisberger sort of coming back. Dallas barely got by. I remember watching that game up in New York City with Niels, and after we had played on Thursday night, I look at it and say, look, it's we're not going to wet ourselves up there. I don't think it's going to be 31-3 in the third quarter unless there's a lot of mistakes made that this team hasn't made before now. Now, the Jimmy Smith thing, if they wind up losing, I'm going to say Antonio Brown's going to be a major factor in having them lose. If not Le'Veon Bell, where I think there's some matchup issues there as well. And we haven't seen the Steelers, for all the success we've had the last couple of years, this is the closest, Hayward aside, and, they got the kid with the concussion protocol. Okay, they're missing a couple of guys. We're missing a couple of guys. Certainly we've talked about Yanda and Suggs being banged up all year long. And, it's Week 16. It's Christmas. Everybody's banged up. But they have an advantage in this game, and they really do. And will I be shocked if the Ravens win? No, but I think this is a taller tree to climb than they've climbed recently, given the way they've played, given what the body of work, as you always say, over 14 weeks. To think that they're going to go on the road and win this game and then the next game, I'd love to see it. I'm on the plane. I'm flying to Pittsburgh on Christmas Day. Count me as someone that wants to believe, but the only way I'm going to believe is for them to go do it.
Right. And I mean, I think that's a completely valid opinion. I think that's a valid stance because, I mean, you do look at the fact that this team hasn't played particularly well when Jimmy Smith has not been on the field. And to this point, as we approach the weekend and get into the weekend, still not much optimism that he's going to play. Missed practice Wednesday. John Harbaugh said once again on Wednesday that it was basically saying, we'll prepare to play with the guys we have. That's generally code from John Harbaugh that a guy's probably not going to be out there. So you have that factor. You have the factor that this offense and Joe Flacco have not played particularly well on the road this year. They've had a couple decent performances on the road. They were decent in Dallas, at least for stretches of that game. The New England game, they played better later in the game, but by that point they had already fallen behind big and were only back in it because of a couple special teams gaffes. You have to go back to September, the last time this team won a game on the road. They beat winless Cleveland, and they beat a Jacksonville team that has 2 wins as we go into Christmas. So, there's not a whole lot there to think that the Ravens are going to win in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati back-to-back. If they had to win one of these 2 games to get in as a wild card, or they were in a little bit better position to just win the division if they just won one of these 2, I'd feel much better about their chances. I'd say, I'd be betting on them to be able to do that. But to win both under these circumstances, and as you pointed out, this is a Pittsburgh team that's playing much better. They're relatively healthy. Stephon Tuitt dealing with a knee issue. I think that's a bigger loss than anticipated if he doesn't play, although I know Mike Tomlin has expressed some optimism that he'll be out there. Ladarius Green, their tight end, who didn't play when the Ravens hosted Pittsburgh back in early November. He's in the concussion protocol. He's someone who's been a nice addition to their offense. So, they're not at full strength either, but their defense has been playing a lot better than we saw earlier in the year. I mean, you look at them statistically, they're not all that terribly far behind the Ravens now. Ravens still have a better defense, but we know Pittsburgh has a superior offense to the Ravens. So, I mean, this game comes down to really 2 factors for me. I mean, if we're going to make it that simple, one is the Jimmy Smith factor. You're not going to shut out Pittsburgh. They weren't going to shut out Pittsburgh with Jimmy Smith. Eric Weddle made the point, pretty tough to play those guys whether we're going to have Jimmy or not. And I think it's fair to say that. But can you prevent them from going off? Can you prevent Antonio Brown from going absolutely nuts?
Can you get off the field on defense? I mean, just period. Can you get off the field in 3 downs? How often can you do that? Can you get a pick? Can you get a strip sack? Can you force a fumble? That's the way the game.
Punts. I mean, just make a few stops. Just don't make it what happened. Remember 2014, the Sunday night game there, which was right after Jimmy Smith suffered the Liz Frank injury. That was a game Roethlisberger threw 6 touchdowns. In fact, that's the only time Pittsburgh has beaten the Ravens in their last 7 meetings. So, you just have to prevent something like that from happening. And then the other factor for me is, how does this offense perform? How does Joe Flacco perform? I mean, Flacco, we've talked about his performance all year long. I get it. There have been a lot of other things going on that have worked against him. But you look at it now, the offensive line is the healthiest it's been really all year, and it's played at its highest level that it has all year over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Is it the best O-line in the league? No, but they've played at an acceptable level. They're coming off a performance against Philadelphia where they ran the ball exceptionally well, even if they didn't run it enough in a few key spots, as we talked about. He's got a vertical threat in Mike Wallace, who had a 95-yard touchdown against Pittsburgh in the first meeting. So, he has some of those things working for him a little bit more than he has maybe earlier in the season. You need to see Joe Flacco playing at a high level. Does he need to throw 5 touchdowns? No, but this needs to be one of his best games of the year.
Fair enough. That's a really good, of all the things we've said this week, this has to be his best game, right? If he plays his best game, we're going to win, probably, right?
Does he have to play as as perfectly and as explosively as he did against Miami, I think that would be a lot to ask, but I don't think it's a lot to ask for
floating
him to
passes and throwing off his back foot and
push
dirt in
the
the
ball down the field.
Right.
This can't be one of those games where he's throwing 43 times but is only averaging 5.5 yards per attempt. You got to push the ball down the field. You got to put heat on the Pittsburgh defense. And frankly, I think you're going to have to keep up with the Pittsburgh offense, because I do think, even though it's not acceptable to say, well, without Jimmy Smith, you're going to give up 30 points and that's okay. No, but at the same time, I'm not going to be unrealistic enough to say, well, without Jimmy Smith, you should still be able to hold them to, say, 14 points. I think that would be very ambitious. So this kind of gets into that formula that we talked about in that New England game. We talked about it in the Dallas game. This is going to be one of those performances that this offense needs to score into the 20s, I think, and I think well into the 20s. I think if you're just counting on going to Pittsburgh and only managing 17, 20 points, I'm not sure that's going to be enough. In fact, I'd be kind of surprised if that's enough, unless we're dealing with some really harsh weather at Heinz Field. So, I think, again, you look at how Joe is profiled on the road this year. There have been a couple okay performances. He was okay statistically against New England. He was okay statistically against Dallas. Even though the offense collectively bogged down for stretches of those two games. But you look at some of his performances earlier in the year. Ugly performance against the Jets, ugly performance against the Giants. Jacksonville wasn't very pretty either, even though he had that stretch of completions in the first half. So this is it's clear, and this has kind of been the story of Joe's career. It's the story of many quarterbacks' careers, quite frankly. They play well at home. They struggle more on the road, and that's been the narrative for Joe once again in 2016. So, as much as we've talked about the yards per attempt and throwing so many times and not being as productive as you'd like, this is that opportunity. What do we say about Joe Flacco that makes him a good quarterback, that makes him a quarterback you want to have? He wins games. He's won games over his career. Well, the statistics haven't been all that great this year. This is his opportunity. This is the Ravens' opportunity to win a big game and put themselves on the precipice of being back in the postseason. So, I think, it's not all about Flacco. It's not all about Jimmy Smith. But, those two factors, Smith's absence and Flacco needing to play at a high level, those are the two biggest things that stick out for me. Probably obvious, but that doesn't make it any less true.
Yeah, he can only throw it, though. He can't catch it, right?
Sure.
So, at some point, Perryman's got to catch the ball. Steve Smith's going to be a factor in this thing. Obviously, Mike Wallace gets all, keyed up for this kind of game. I think even Dennis Pitt, I know I saw you at the locker on Wednesday asking him about going back to Pittsburgh because it's been a little while. There's some juice for this. And honestly, just, speaking on my own behalf, I had booked a flight to Pittsburgh about a month ago. My wife's sister's having some issues in New Hampshire, and she was going to fly up and do the holiday. And we talked about Christmas Day, and I said, well, if the game means something, I'll go. But, I don't want to get in a plane on Christmas Day any more than anybody else does. And I said, if it feels that way, and I got to be honest with you, when I came home after the Eagles game, I thought about the game. I thought about it being a week out, and I said, I know that feeling, right? Like, I didn't go to the game last year. It was the week my wife got cancer the second time, so I didn't sit in that stadium. I've sat in that stadium for, cold nights and those goofy jailbird, Three Stooges outfits and Bumblebee outfits they run around in out there, and that smoke coming up, and you and I crossing the bridge. I got so many memories up there. I just thought, what? If they're going to go up there and win or lose on Christmas Day, I kind of want to be there,
Right.
So I kind of want to be there. I know how hostile it is. I know it's Christmas Day. I'm moving Christmas Day in my own family with my mom, my son, my daughter-in-law, my wife. And it works out fine. I mean, Boxing Day is Christmas Day. That's Dennis Pitta said he can sell it to his 3-year-old kids and they'll buy it. My family's buying it too. But there is something that's big time about this game, and the whole country's going to be watching, and I just think it's going to be a great game, and I think Tucker on a field goal level, I don't think Flacco's going to spit it up. I don't think the veteran guys on this team, the Suggs, the Yondas, the Smith, the guys like Steve Smith throwing the helmet and all the nonsense got reported last week, dude, he wants to win, right? I mean, elf outfit aside, like all that, this is the most important game of his career, right, for him. And for a couple of these guys that may not get back to this level to be playing in a playoff position, they want to win this game.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what you just mentioned about Steve Smith specifically, but there have been different things. We saw Mike Wallace, kind of shake off a few guys, slapping hands after the long reception on Sunday. I mean, there is some frustration, and I don't think it's necessarily personal, where necessarily that teammates are ticked off at each other, or I think there's certainly been some frustration with the coaching. I think that was evident with Mark Trestman. I think the fact that it was so much frustration with him, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think that there's some frustration with Marty Morningwig, because they really haven't had much better results. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. So you're going to have some of that, but as you just stated, it's a product of wanting to win, and you do have some individuals in that locker room, like a Steve Smith, like a Terrell Suggs, like an Elvis Dumerville, Dennis Pitt, Ladarius Webb, guys that may or may not be back here next year, whether it's because of retirement or whether it's because of contract standing.
And by the way, some of them have rings, and some of them, like Steve Smith, like way in search of, like watching the Dan Marino story, right? I talked to Chad Brown about that. We know Chad pretty well from our Super Bowl endeavors, right. And he came back chasing a ring, and knows that vibe. And when you haven't won, and you're at this point, and all that Steve Smith's done the last 3 years, moving his family around, rehabbing, this is the biggest game of his life on Sunday. So I don't take that lightly, and because of that, that's one of the reasons I'm getting on the plane and going to Pittsburgh, quite frankly, because I know the stakes are high here, and I know how bad they want it, and I think, Harbaugh wouldn't be able to stomach a second season not making the playoffs, right? And, I think the organization would have to evaluate itself.
Yeah, this is, it's really going to be interesting to see how this week and, of course, the regular season finale in Cincinnati, assuming the Ravens are still playing for something, and depending on what happens with that Miami game, the Ravens might be playing for their playoff lives, period, on Sunday. Miami wins, Ravens lose, they're eliminated, and then Week 17 becomes meaningless. But this game and potentially the next, it's fascinating to really think about how it could define so many different facets of this organization, from the coaching staff down to the players and even the front office. We've talked a lot about some of the misses in the draft, some of the questionable personnel decisions that have hurt this team on the field over the last few years. Let's not forget that just because this team is 8-6 and playing for a division title, that doesn't mean that there haven't been some things there that have still held true. But you win on Sunday, you win in Cincinnati, you're division champs, you're 10-6, and there's a much different feel about this football team going forward.
Yeah, people hang the purple lights right around then, right?
Yeah, but
like next
regardless
Sunday.
of then what even happens in the playoffs, even if it's even a one and done, just still winning a division title coming off a 5-11 season, there's a much different feel to it than if you lose on Sunday and you're either eliminated then, or then you go to Cincinnati, and even if you win, things don't break the way you need them to. There's a much different vibe there. There's a much different position for Steve Bisciotti potentially, and how he evaluates everyone, including John Harbaugh and Ozzie Newsome, quite frankly. So, doesn't mean I necessarily am convinced that mass changes are made if they don't make the playoffs by any means, but that kind of stuff's on the table.
Hey, hang on now. We are 4 days, 5 days out now on them almost blowing the game, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Right.
I mean, they came a 2-point fingertip C.J. Mosley. Thanks for coming out to Adams Jeep in Aberdeen, C.J., and for knocking the ball down, away from this game not meaning anything. I mean, this darkness that would settle before these two games. Don't think that this thing isn't weighing in the balance, because I think it is to some degree. I didn't like what I saw on Sunday.
Right.
I know you didn't like what you saw on Sunday. I can't think that Steve Bisciotti liked what he saw on Sunday, and I can't think that John Harbaugh hit the Monday press conference thinking, boy, that was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done, and I think everybody sort of notices that 8-9 years into this thing, and we got to go win in Pittsburgh this week, or we're going to be talking about the whole season being sort of defined by bad decisions, bad quarterback play, bad play calling, not good enough defense, not good enough, whatever it is. When you don't make the playoffs, Nothing's good, right? And I'm sure when Bisciotti has his press conference, that would be it. Or you go to Pittsburgh and you throw a couple touchdown passes and, you impose your will there, as we've seen them do. I just think this is a different Steelers group on the other side, too. They like to win over there, too.
Yeah, and that's a major factor here. I mean, this is a Steelers team that's playing well. As much as many people were ready to bury them, kind of like how the Ravens looked in October. Now, Pittsburgh lost that tough one to Dallas, but they've won 5 in a row since then. So, and the big key is their defense has played much better. So, getting back to the whole, what these next 2 games mean for the future of the organization. I mean, everything could be on the table potentially if things don't go well. And I think, let's just say, for hypothetically speaking, and look, I'm not into moral victories, but if the Ravens go to Pittsburgh, play really well, and lose 24-23, compared to if Roethlisberger throws 4 touchdowns and Flacco throws 2 picks and they lose 31-13, that's a much different. That's a much different perception. That's a much different feeling there. It's a loss either way. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this team would be happy to lose in Pittsburgh if it's a tight game. But I think on the back end of what happened at the end of the Philadelphia game, if they go to Pittsburgh and they lose in a way that they kind of did against New England, let's say, where it wasn't particularly close, regardless of what the final score looked like, then everything potentially could be on the table as far as how Steve Bisciotti's going to view this. So, I think this is like I said, a fascinating final 2 games to really think how it's going to define the Baltimore Ravens moving forward, how it's going to define John Harbaugh, a number of individuals, even Joe Flacco for all the success that he's had. The memory of Super Bowl 47 keeps moving a little bit further away, and this is a chance. This is the kind of game that Joe in his career has typically played really, really well.
And I was going to say, Harbaugh teams have played really well, right?
Right.
When you said 31-13, I thought to myself, well, that's never happened before, right? Well, that would be a really, that. That's never happened, literally. I mean, even in the times they've lost, obviously the Cundiff thing and the Evans thing, and even out in Indianapolis when they lost to the Colts in that game where Flacco couldn't move, essentially, and Ed Reed was going to, they didn't get run out of the gym. I mean, they came dangerously close to getting run out of the gym in New England. When they were getting their ass kicked there. I mean, they were getting their ass kicked in Cleveland earlier this year. Right. They've had their noses bloodied a couple of times in sort of some ugly ways, and they've also been run down at the end by the Dallases and the New York Giants, amongst others. And I think you forgive the bad losses like the Jets. I mean, the Steelers lost to the Eagles. All that goes away, but it all gets magnified if you get your ass kicked on Christmas Day in Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is a case that, if you don't play well on Sunday, win or lose, I mean, it's that's the biggest thing. But if you don't play well on top of losing, and it's a game where you shoot yourselves in the foot repeatedly, and you lose by a couple touchdowns, something along those lines. Which 2013, remember that was the year Flacco got hurt in Detroit, wasn't 100%. New England came in here, and the Ravens were at a point then when they controlled their own destiny to make the playoffs. It was Week 16, and the Patriots absolutely destroyed them.
Yeah.
I mean, just an ugly, ugly performance. And look, we know that 2013 team wasn't all that good. Probably a team that's profiled, not a carbon copy of this year's team, but not terribly different.
Well, that team couldn't run the ball. This team doesn't run the ball, right?
Refuses to run the ball, right,
yeah.
Right. That this team plays better defense than that team did. But overall, I think overall quality of the football team probably not terribly different than that team that lost its last 2 and finished 8-8.
Hey, so dude, that team's MVP was its kicker too. Remember?
Yeah, well, and there you go. There's another similarity. So, and I'm not saying that to be doom and gloom, but that was an example of a game where the Ravens had high stakes there, and they completely didn't just lose; they got destroyed. So, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think this will be a close game, but there's you're playing on the road. This team hasn't played particularly well on the road. If they win, it's going to be their first road win in exactly 3 months. September 25th against Jacksonville was their last road victory. So There's a lot setting up there that's working against them, but recent history, let's keep in mind, Ravens have won 4 straight against Pittsburgh. Yeah, one of those was Michael Vick playing, but one of those was also Ryan Mallett playing for the Ravens. So they deserve a lot of credit for how they've played against Pittsburgh here over the last few years. And it's funny. There's always, because of how this rivalry started, and you think of the infancy of the Ravens and never being able to beat Pittsburgh in those early years. But Ravens have won 6 of the last 7, counting the playoffs. I mean, this is really a case, as much as we're talking about so many factors probably working in Pittsburgh's favor at this point, including having home field for this game. There's really a sense in Pittsburgh that the Ravens really have their number and have kind of been their daddy over the last few years.
I did the math on this, Luke. Baltimore always beats Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh always beats Cincinnati. Cincinnati always beats Baltimore.
Yeah. Right? Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? It really, and this year, let's face it, this year hasn't been the best year for the AFC North. I mean, even whoever wins this division, certainly we're not going to compare that to some of the best division winners in the North over the last decade or so. I mean, I think that's clear, but it's always so competitive. And another example where Ravens go to Pittsburgh, have a chance, and even if they win that game, don't sleep on that Week 17 game, because you saw Cincinnati could give Pittsburgh everything they could handle on this past Sunday, and Steelers fortunate to come away with the win in that one. So, even Cincinnati having the down year that they are, they have a chance to play spoilers, much like the Ravens tried to do with Pittsburgh Week 16 last year.
Yeah, I won't be holding my breath thinking the Browns are going to be representative against the Steelers next week.
Yeah,
Luke Jones.
That's one I don't think anyone should count for any help there.
He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. You can find him, Luke at WNST.net as well. Anything you want to say on the Pro Bowl? Just, I was in the locker room after that. Obviously, I was with C.J. Mosley at Adams Jeep when you had sent the WNST text out. He knew about it. Apparently, Harbaugh called the guys earlier in the day. I'm nonplussed, and it's funny, as much as you congratulate a Kyle Juszczyk who's, really excited about it, or Tucker, or, any of those guys, then, there's always Weddle got screwed. I mean, Bisciotti ran over to Weddle and said, you got screwed, and Weddle's going to hear that all day long and have to take the podium and talk about it too. It is a pretty subjective thing now, isn't it, right? I mean, I don't know that any of us really thought C.J. Mosley had to be there, but it's nice to know that his reputation's that great, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You mentioned those two names. I mean, I actually made my official prediction for the Ravens Pro Bowl selections a little bit earlier in the day on Tuesday, and I had exactly what ended up being picked, other than I didn't have Mosley in, and I did have Eric Weddle in. I mean, Marshall Yanda was kind of a slam dunk, even if it's no less amazing. I mean, 6 straight Pro Bowls. He's only the 4th guy in team history to be able to claim that. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, and Jonathan Ogden being the other 3.
Yeah, when you get to that point, it's like his reputation precedes him, right?
Oh, sure.
There's no accident anymore. It is, it is rubber stamped. His greatness for what that is and what that represents at that position.
No doubt, and it's amazing when you think about it. Now, he probably needs at least 3 more Pro Bowls. I'd say if you look at the history of guards in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, you typically aren't going to find anyone south of 9 or 10 selections. But he's approaching that territory.
But you talk about something that would motivate him, right? I mean, and we know what kind of guy he is. I could see him hanging around just to say, look, I got a shot, I got a ring, I got money, I'm going back to the farm.
Right.
I want to be a Hall of Famer. You know what I mean? And we didn't really talk much with him about that, but that's something that I could see burning at him in July of next year, right?
Sure, and with him, I think the big key is just going to be how does he hold up. I mean, clearly, he had a shoulder issue a few years back. He's had the shoulder issue this year. It's about health. The rep, like you just said. I mean, the reputation certainly helps him in that argument now. But he's played at I think PFF has him as their top graded guard in football. So it's not as though he's a guy that's just making it based on reputation at this point. But there might get to a point where that's the case, and that might help him in his path for the Hall of Fame. But Yanda, you expected. Tucker, you certainly expected him to make it. I mean, he's had one of the great seasons in the history of kickers in the NFL. Juszczyk, you felt good for him. I mean, Lord knows the Ravens have used him so much in pass protection as a lead blocker, as a receiver. So nice to see him get the recognition. But I'll admit I was a little surprised Mosley making it. Not that he's had a bad year, but you look at some of the optics. He's only third on the team in tackles. He certainly he's played well, but I wouldn't have guessed him making it. But it does speak to what you just said as far as the reputation that he has established for himself. And he's bounced back nicely from what was kind of a difficult second season for him, and I think he'd even acknowledged that.
Well, he was injured,
Yeah. I mean, he had the wrist surgery that really prevented him from working out in the off season. I think that cost him. But so I didn't have a problem with him making it, but Weddle should have been there. I had no issue with Devin McCourty or Eric Berry. I think both of those individuals are very deserving. Reggie Nelson making it for the Raiders, and look, he's a guy who gets interceptions. He's a guy who can play at a high level, but his play, and even seeing him in Cincinnati all those years, a little more up and down over the years. And
I bet Weddle will wind up playing there because I bet Reggie Nelson will be in the Super Bowl, right? Or that, right?
Who knows? We'll see. And guys back out anyway. I mean, that's the thing. As much as how many years have we talked? I think back to Justin Forsett 2 years ago being snubbed, and then he wound up in the game anyway.
If Eric Weddle wants to go to the Pro Bowl, I have a feeling he'll be playing dodgeball before it's all over with, right?
I have a feeling there's at least going to be a chance that he'll get there. Sure. And Kansas City could be in the Super Bowl. Who knows?
I felt bad for the poor guys that like CJ's going to Phoenix and Orlando. They didn't get to go to Hawaii anymore.
I know,
man.
right? I mean, if you want to go to Disney World, it's fine. But I would think, especially for let's say Kyle Juszczyk, who's never been there before. I mean, I know Sam Cooke invited him last year as a token to all the special teams guys. Sam invited everyone, and Juszczyk said, "Nah, first time I go to the Pro Bowl, I want to be because I'm there. I was invited to play in the game." So here he gets invited and doesn't get to go to Hawaii, but overall,
should have taken a free trip. I thought he went to Harvard. What?
I know, right? But Weddle deserved to be there. I think I'm not big on this. I think the term snub is used way too often. I mean, the reality is you only have, you have 16 teams in the conference, and let's face it, none of us here in town are watching all other teams as frequently as we see the Ravens. So it is tough to gauge where some of these guys stack up as opposed to other players. And, I think
when they hit free agency where they stack up.
Yeah, sure.
Literally.
But, I think Weddle was absolutely deserving. Would you call it a snub? I guess, sure. I don't think anyone else that was left on the outside looking in was really a snub for the Ravens anyway.
All right, man. Well, rest up. Happy holidays. Tell your mom and your sister to send some cookies or something my way. I'm over here doing radio, just hanging out, waiting to go to Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh. Luke can be reached, Baltimore Luke, at Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. If you want to send him an email, our London trip is on sale. The Baya Toyota Audio Vault is there. Mike Wallace is joining us at Adams Jeep of Aberdeen and swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry on Tuesday. We got all sorts of things happening around here. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.